It was one of those weeks for me. Obviously, everything. Y'all are so far away, or it seems like you are. You have this gap. Yeah. Anyway, we had the wedding yesterday. Beautiful wedding, and congratulations to Sammy and Nick. And we had service today, and the weather was weird all week. Truman classes are in full swing for me as well as for many of you. JBA moved in yesterday, so the JBA kids are here. So everybody's just really busy, and time gets crunched. You know how that works. And you all know me, that from that 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. slot, that's my me time. That's the time I carve out for myself. That's the time I'm in the gym. That's where I'm getting myself focused. That's what gets me through the rest of the day. And the other morning, Michelle said, you know, how was your workout this morning? And I said, I didn't get it all finished. I said, everybody had something to say today to me at the gym. They would come up, hey, Paul, I got this, I got that, whatever. I kept getting distracted by people wanting to talk. And I'm thinking, it's 7 o'clock in the morning, y'all. This is my time. I want to put my headphones on and kind of do my thing. And I came home and we're thinking about the sermon and putting the message together. And Olivia and I were having lunch. And I said, Olivia, give me a title for the sermon. And she's like, what? And I said, give me a title for the sermon. And I guess she could read my mind or knew the week that was going through my head. And she goes, how about making a difference? She goes, I think that, yeah, that needs to be your message this week, making a difference. And I really got to thinking about that. Making a difference. Did my life make a difference? Has your life made a difference? I mean, that's a really heavy thing to say, to make a difference. What does it mean? And most people, we don't ask that question of ourselves every day, right? But we ask it in those quiet moments. We ask it in those moments when we reflect on our children have grown and left home. And you think, did I make a difference? Or after a long career and you're contemplating retirement and thinking back over that career and asking yourself, did I make a difference? Or when you look back just over the years that you've lived and you wondered, did I make a difference? Because in the gospel today, what we're reading today, Jesus shows up and he gives us the very image of what it means to make a difference. And perhaps I think most importantly, and this is what strikes me most about what we read this morning, how ordinary people become part of God's work in changing other people's lives. The passage, it begins, Jesus is walking down this road and he sees a tax collector named Matthew sitting at his tax collector booth. Now, tax collectors, you know this, and sinners were not the people you wanted to associate with. Tax collectors were aligned with corruption and with the Roman government and everything you shouldn't be, right? Corrupt, greedy. Sounds like I'm talking about politicians, but yeah, it's kind of like that. And most people would have just walked by Matthew. This is a sinner. This is a person driven by greed, of self-interest, right? Everybody would have just walked past this person, but Jesus, without giving it a second thought, he stops. And he looked at Matthew and I love this, he says two simple words, follow me. And Matthew got up and followed him. He didn't question. Jesus said, follow me. And he got up and he followed him. And what strikes me about this story is how quickly everything changes for Matthew. One day he's sitting behind this table collecting taxes, and then in the next day he's walking with the Son of God. But why? Because someone saw value in him when everyone else saw his flaws. See, Jesus made a difference in Matthew's life because he didn't see what Matthew was. He saw what Matthew could become. That's how God works. The world will label you by your mistakes, but God just sees your possibilities. The world tends to remember the person we have been, but God sees the person that you're going to be. The world writes people off, and God just keeps rewriting the story. We've talked about that before. And if we are followers of Christ, aren't we just instructed to do the same thing? We talked about this last week. You can't say that I have Jesus in my heart unless you're living the message of Jesus Christ. But making a difference, right? It's not about the grand gestures. It's not about, as I've said before, those aha moments. It's often about seeing someone that other people just overlook or walk past. It's about offering encouragement when other people seem to want to just offer criticisms. And this is something I've said time and time again. It's about believing in people before they've had an opportunity to believe in themselves. You never know what can happen to a person when they feel truly seen, especially a person who feels invisible. Maybe it was a teacher who believes in a struggling student that can change a life. Or a friend who listens can change a life. Or a church that welcomes instead of judges can change a life. Maybe it's just a simple, kind word spoken to someone at just the right moment that can change a life. And Matthew's story reminds us that making a difference often begins with simply seeing the people the way that Jesus saw them. The religious leaders didn't understand this. They were upset that Jesus shared a meal with these less popular people. They asked, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And I love what Jesus said. He says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician. It's the sick that demand my attention." In other words, Jesus didn't come for the people that believed they had it all figured out and put together. He came for those who knew they needed help. And Jesus says this, I love this, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy, not perfection, not status, not appearance, not followers on social media. Mercy. Honestly, in my almost 58 years on this planet, one thing I have learned is that people are rarely ever changed by judgment. They're changed by grace. Think about the people in your lives that have made the greatest difference. I'd be willing to bet they weren't the people who continually pointed out your flaws. They were the people who knew your flaws were there and loved you anyway. They were the people that stood by you when things were difficult. They were the people that showed patience when you really needed it. They were the people that offered mercy. And that's the difference that Jesus makes everywhere he goes in the Gospels. The second half of the passage we read this morning, we have a synagogue leader, and he comes to Jesus. And he's desperate because his daughter has just died. But at the same time, we have these two kind of interweaving stories, which I think is fascinating. Because at the same time, we also have this woman who's been suffering with this bleeding problem for the last 12 years. And she reaches out and she just touches Jesus' cloak. And this is one of these moments in the Gospels, and you all know this, that my absolute favorite story in the Gospels is blind Bartimaeus. And this is very similar if you know the story of blind Bartimaeus, when blind Bartimaeus screams out to Jesus as he's walking past Jesus, and Jesus stops. And here's his blind beggar in the street, and Jesus doesn't walk past him. He says, "Bring him to me." And we have the same thing here. We have this woman in the street who just reaches out and touches his robe. Both situations seem like almost hopeless. We have a father who's lost a daughter. We have a woman who's lost 12 years of her life to this illness. And they both come to Jesus in faith. And Jesus responds to both of them. He stops for the woman. He goes with the father. He restores the woman. He raises the girl. Notice something about this. Jesus is like really busy. Everybody wants a piece of his time. He was surrounded by crowds. People are pulling him in all of these different directions. Yet he never treated people as interruptions. He treated them as opportunities. The people we encounter each day are not interruptions to our ministry. Man, they are our ministry. The neighbor who needs help, the coworker who's discouraged, the family member who is struggling, the stranger who feels invisible. the child who needs a little encouragement, the elderly person who just needs someone to listen. See, every day God places these people in our paths for a reason. Every day we are all given the opportunity to make a difference. And most of the time, we'll never know the impact of that difference. The woman who touched Jesus' cloak this morning could not have known that her story would be told thousands of years later. Matthew couldn't have known that he would write one of the Gospels. A simple act of kindness may seem small in that moment, but God has a way of multiplying small things into something so much greater. A tiny little seed becomes a tree. Something I said yesterday at the wedding, a conversation becomes a friendship. A friendship can change a life. And that's how God's kingdoms grow. Just one person at a time, one act of mercy at a time, one opportunity at a time. So perhaps the question this morning, it's not, can I change the world? That question feels overwhelming and impossible. But perhaps the better question today is, can I make a difference for just one person today? Can I see someone the way Jesus saw Matthew? Can I offer mercy instead of judgment? Can I notice someone who everyone overlooks? Can I bring hope to someone who is discouraged? Can I show kindness where there is pain? Because that is where making the difference begins. Not with fame or power or recognition, simply with faithfulness. A little bit of compassion, sprinkle in some mercy, and simply your willingness to follow Jesus. Because the good news of the passage this morning, Jesus made a difference in Matthew's life, a big one. He made a big difference in a suffering woman's life and in a grieving father's life. And through his Spirit, he continues to make a difference in the world today. Through us. Ordinary people. Common people. People who simply choose to see others, to love others, to serve others in his name. So may we leave this place this morning determined to do exactly that. For we may never know how many lives are changed when we decide to make a difference in just one. Amen.